Hello! In this video, we're going to talk about some useful words and phrases that you'll hear many times throughout the job search process. We will organize these words into three categories: things, actions, and people. Let's begin with some important definitions of things or general concepts: occupation and career. An occupation is like a job because both are very specific. For example, being a waiter is a job or occupation. If Tom works as a waiter, a bartender, and a restaurant manager over 20 years, he can say that he has a career in the restaurant industry. An occupation is a person's work as a way to earn money. A career is an occupation or profession that requires special training and continues over a long period of time. Here's another example. Yuki has worked for the clothing company Uniqlo for 10 years. She began her career in the fashion industry with different occupations, first as a sales clerk, then as a store manager. Now she works at the company's main office as a fashion designer. Let's look at two more definitions of things. Employment is a general term for the activity that people do to make money. When someone asks you about your employment history, focus on work for which you were paid money. A job application is a written request for employment, usually a specific document to be completed. In the job search process, there are some actions or verbs that are very important. Let's look at 5 of these. The first is to search for a job. This means to look for work in a specific occupation. To apply for a job is to formally ask for employment, usually in writing. This means completing a specific job application or sending documents like a resume and cover letter. We will talk more about these later in Units 2 and 3. To interview for a job is to answer questions in a formal meeting. Most interviews are face-to-face, but sometimes people can interview by phone or video calls. To be hired for a job is to be given a job and then paid for the work. If someone says, "You're hired," that means you got the job. To work is to do an activity related to one's occupation. Now, let's move on to people. A job seeker is someone who is looking for a job. After a person applies for a job, they become a candidate or an applicant, which is a person who might get the job. These next 2 words sound almost the same, but have very different meanings. Pay attention to the ending sounds of these 2 words, employer and employee. An employer is the person making the decision to give the applicant a job. The employer can be a specific person or can also be a company or organization. When a candidate is hired and begins working, he is then called an employee. Employee is a more formal word for worker. By now, you probably noticed that many of these new vocabulary words look similar, but they are actually different word forms, nouns and verbs. One way to help remember all of these new words is to organize them into 3 categories. Things are nouns, actions are verbs, and people are nouns. Let's move on to a game where you can practice grouping the words into the correct category.